Welcome, fellow travelers. Welcome to all who have journeyed this path for a while. Welcome to those who are new to the path. Welcome to those who aren't sure where the path lies. Welcome to new visitors and to old friends. Welcome to the young at heart, to those of all ages and colors, all orientations and gender expressions, all abilities and cultures and opinions. Know that you are welcome here, no matter what. For this is God's house, and all may enter here. Welcome to everyone. We hope that you find peace and uplift in our worship this morning.
May God's light and love be with you all.
We create images of you, placing you within constraints of our humanity. You call upon us to be your people, pushing the limits of who we think we can be. Afraid of what to expect, we hold back and hesitate to commit.
I'm reading from Isaiah, 6th chapter, verses 1 through 14. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord seated on a throne, high and exalted, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him were seraphs, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces, with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying. And they were calling to one another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. All at the sound of their voices, the doorposts and thresholds shook, and the temple was filled with smoke. Woe to me, I cried. I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. Then one of the seraphs flew to me with a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with tongs from the altar. With it he touched my mouth and said, See, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away and your sin is atoned for. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? And I said, Here am I, send me. He said, Go and tell this people, Be ever hearing, but never understanding. Be ever seeing, but never perceiving. Make the heart of this people calloused, and their voices dull. And close their eyes, otherwise they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, and understand with their hearts, and turn to be healed. Then I said, For how long, O Lord? And he answered, Until the cities lie ruined and without inhabitant, until the houses are left deserted, and the fields ruined and ravaged, until the Lord has sent everyone far away, and the land is utterly forsaken. And though a tenth remained in the land, it will again be laid waste. But as a terebinth and oak leave stumps when they are cut down, so the holy seed will be the stump in the land.
Sometimes we volunteer. Sometimes we volunteer for hard things. Sometimes we volunteer for hard things before we know that they are hard things. This is the story of Isaiah This is also our story. Isaiah has a dream or a vision. Isaiah has an experience of God, of the divine. It's like one of those movies where the protagonist opens a door and finds himself in another world. Or for you Trekkies, it's like the holodeck. Or for you time travel sci-fi likers, it's when you move from one time to another. Seraphs stood in attendance on him. Each of them had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered his legs, and with 2 he would fly. And one would call to the other, Holy, holy, holy. The Lord of hosts, God's presence fills all the earth. The doorposts would shake at the sound of the one who called, and the house kept filling with smoke. Now, upon finding himself in this space, Isaiah recognizes that he does not belong. He's unworthy to be among the celestial hosts. He realizes, as was ancient belief, that to look upon God was dangerous and forbidden. And yet that's precisely where Isaiah found himself, standing in the presence of God. Woe is me, he cried out. I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. Yet my own eyes have beheld the King, the Lord of hosts. In response, one of the seraphs cleanses Isaiah's lips with a hot coal. Isaiah's guilt and sins are purged, and Isaiah is purified in this act of fiery baptism. Sometimes we volunteer. Sometimes we volunteer for hard things. Sometimes we volunteer for hard things before we know they are hard things. This is the story of Isaiah. And then God asks for a volunteer. Now, God didn't name the task that the volunteer would be doing. It reminds me, it's kind of like that time where I called my brother up on the phone with an opportunity, I told him. Now, I only told him just how heavy that couch was and just how steep those stairs from the basement were. And I only told him that after he agreed to help me. Sometimes we volunteer for hard things before we know they're hard because we're in relationship with the person. And so God sends Isaiah to prophesy to a people who will not listen and to a people who will not change their behaviors. The result, the message that Isaiah must deliver is that because of their refusal, their resistance to listen to God, the world will become a wasteland. Isaiah asked, "How long, my Lord?" And God replied, "Till towns lie waste without inhabitants, and houses without people, and the ground lies waste and desolate, for the Lord will banish the population, and deserted sites are many in the midst of the land." Isaiah must deliver a hard message. Isaiah must deliver a message that will not be well received, and the result will be near utter destruction. All that will be left is a stump. Sometimes we volunteer. Sometimes we volunteer for hard things. Sometimes we volunteer for hard things before we know just how hard they're going to be. This is the story of Isaiah. This is also our story. So at some point, each of us experienced something that brought us to this community. Or maybe we experienced something that just brought us to this YouTube video. Isaiah had a dream or a vision that caused him to volunteer. Maybe you had a mystical experience like Isaiah did. Or maybe you simply had a desire to be a part of a community of Jesus followers. Or maybe you just wanted to be among a group of people that cared about the world. Or maybe a Facebook ad caught your attention, and that's why you're watching the video today. Or maybe you were raised in this church, and so you didn't make a conscious decision. It just kind of happened. Regardless, be it curiosity or duty or the mystical, something brought each of us here today. Now, just as Isaiah made a promise at the time of his fiery baptism, many of us made a promise at our watery baptisms. In choosing to follow Jesus, we chose to follow his teachings. We made a promise. Sometimes we volunteer. Sometimes we volunteer for hard things. Sometimes we volunteer for hard things before we know they are hard. This is the story of Isaiah. This is also our story. When I came forward in that storefront church on Laclede Avenue in 1969, I don't think I fully understood the nature of the promise that I was making. I gave my good confession that day and was later baptized. But I did not fully grasp the magnitude of that promise. Sure, part of the reason that was the case was because I was a child. But even those who wait until adulthood to make commitments to follow Jesus do not fully grasp what they're signing up for. Heck, I don't think even clergy have a full grasp of the commitment that we are making at our ordinations. Sometimes we volunteer for hard things before we know just how hard they can be. Our promise as Christians is to love our neighbors, to do justice, and to walk humbly. None of these are easy things. None of these are simple. Like Isaiah prophesying to a people who will not listen and who will not change their behavior for the better. Our fragmented world is often resistant to the teachings of Jesus. Our fragmented world too often rejects the hard things necessary to bring the beloved community into fruition. And just so you don't misunderstand me, it's not because we're the only faith that teaches universal love of neighbor. Love is the core message of all faiths, and our world too often resists and rejects the love as it's being taught by our interfaith, multi-faith neighbors. And so, like Isaiah, we sometimes cry out about this broken world. We cry out, "How long, my Lord?" And the reply seems to be, "Till towns lie waste without inhabitants and houses without people. And the ground lies waste and desolate, for the Lord will banish the population, and deserted sites are many in the midst of the land." Many people choose to follow Jesus in the expectation of a better life, of an easy life. And while I agree that our faith does make life better, richer, fuller, following Jesus doesn't mean an easy life. Following Jesus doesn't mean we can be radical capitalists without radical compassion. It doesn't mean we can hoard without giving substantially of our wealth and of our whole authentic selves to make this world a better place. Sometimes we volunteer. Sometimes we volunteer for hard things. And sometimes we don't even grasp just how hard the things we're volunteering for will be. This is the story of Isaiah. This is also our story. Following Jesus means sacrifice. Following Jesus means making choices that favor love of neighbor over personal convenience. A few examples. There are people that walk back and forth in front of my house. I recognize some of these people. These are people who are unhoused. And I could pretend that the world's not a world that has unhoused people. I could pretend that it is not what it is, that it is something different than it is. I could support punitive governmental policies that keep that poor person, to keep the poor out of my sight, so that I can pretend that the world's a different place than it actually is. I could see them as a threat instead of as a sin, a failure of our city, our nation, and faith, and me, to keep promises to God. As church, we could accept the views of those who tried to stop us from providing a porta potty, who would prefer that we didn't have a water station outside the church. But you see, if we didn't fight those attitudes, we wouldn't be consistent with Christ's teachings. Another example. Pretending that racism is a personal behavior and that our systems are neutral and that any election is just going to magically take racism away. Doing that would make our lives more easy. It would make our lives easier for those of us with privilege. Avoiding that hard work of learning about the insidious nature of racism in this nation would give us perhaps a superficial peace. Pretending to be colorblind would be easier, but it would not be consistent with the teachings of Christ. As church, we could avoid the emotionally difficult realities that racism is embedded even in churches, even in this church, even in each of us. As followers of Jesus, we made promises to God, just as Isaiah did. We promised to love our neighbors and do justice, and so we do the hard work. We do the hard work with ourselves. We do the hard work of justice in the community. Sometimes we volunteer. Sometimes we volunteer for hard things, and sometimes we volunteer for things before we know just how hard they are going to be. This is the story of Isaiah. This is the story of those of us who follow Jesus. What a year this has been. What a hard year this has been. Not a one of us signed up for this pandemic. Not a one of us signed up for this discord in our culture. Now we are beginning the 9th month since we were able to meet in person for worship. We've been going 9 months not being able to touch one another, not being able to be in one another's presence. We've been through lockdown. We've been through a slow return, not so much to normal, but to a relaxing of that lockdown. Now, just as predicted, the numbers of COVID cases have been on the rise with the cooler weather. Oregon has seen over 1,000 cases multiple days this week. The combined number of daily cases in Lynn and Benton counties reached 54 yesterday. I think that's the highest we've ever reached. I think that's a record. And it only seems to be getting worse. None of us signed up for this. But you see, we made a promise to love our neighbors. And so that guides our actions. We made a promise to follow Jesus. And so it has to guide our actions and the choices that we make now. Now, the governor has issued an order effective Wednesday for a 2-week freeze. We are being asked to stay home again. And this time, the weather's not as good. We can't be outdoors as much. None of us signed up for this. Or did we? Maybe we did. You see, we promised to love our neighbors. And there is no love more basic than doing that which will keep our neighbor healthy and alive. Sometimes we volunteer. Sometimes we volunteer for hard things. Sometimes we volunteer for hard things before we realize just how hard they're going to be. This is the story of Isaiah. This is also our story. Amen.
Would you join with me in the Lord's Prayer? Our Creator, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
I'd like to invite all of you now for our aged ritual of communion, where we all gather together and all are welcome. And Jesus was with his disciples at the Last Supper, and he took a piece of bread and he broke it, and he said, "This is my body, broken for you." Then he took the wine, he poured it, and he said, "This is my blood, shed for you. Eat, drink, and remember me." We have received from your hand, O God, bread from the earth to fortify our hearts, and wine to gladden our spirits. May these signs of Christ's presence fill our lives with such gratitude that we are compelled to spread the joy wherever we go.
Be love in the world. Do justice. Walk humbly. Amen.